the ultimate icon of evolution. Now, what is an icon? Now, if you ask that question in Romania, they will point to a picture of some of their saints from the history of the Orthodox Church. That's an icon, and it reminds them that they need to pray. It reminds them that they have this saint that's watching over them during their lifetime. But we also use the word icon in a general sense, and it is images or words or things that really stand out and represent the United States of America. The bald eagle, for example, or apple pie, the golden arches. If you travel in a foreign country, you might really be glad to see the golden arches. I've had a Big Mac in about 4 different countries, and they all taste the same. You love to see that that's an icon of America. Well, an icon of evolution are those images that stand out and represent this idea that things change and evolve over millions of years. And I think the biggest reason why so many people believe in evolution is because it allows them to believe that humans evolve. Because you see, if humans evolve, then there is no God. There's no reason to have a God. And so you're not responsible to a God. If humans have evolved, if we are just complex animals, then we're not really responsible for our moral behavior, because in fact there is no moral behavior. You can't use the word morality to describe animals, can you? So you can do what you want to. And along with that, then, if there is no God, if we have evolved, then there's not going to be a judgment. If you want to live this life serving yourself, then you can do that, because there's not going to be a judgment. You're not going to have to answer to God for anything you've done. And so the picture of human evolution really symbolizes this whole theory, this whole anti-God theory, that things have evolved and humans are just not even, some evolutionists don't even believe that humans are the apex of human evolution. They believe we're still evolving. Who knows what we might evolve into? Some kind of alien things that we can only conceive of as being aliens. They think we're going to continue evolving. Well, this morning I want us to look at 2 main points about this idea of human evolution. Number one, the evidence is sparse. There's not a lot of evidence, even evolutionists admit, to prove that humans have evolved. And number 2, the evidence that does exist has been tainted. Tainted by people who have preconceived beliefs and preconceived ideas, and they're not being honest with the evidence. And I'll even quote a couple of evolutionists who tell us that evolutionists are not being honest with the evidence. But then I also want to conclude with 2 points. One is, evolutionists like to ask Christians, well, if humans did evolve, then where did different races come from? If everything came from Adam and Eve, then why do we have red, yellow, black, and white races today? Well, I'm going to answer that. We're going to answer that. And then finally, we're going to point out that obviously man is made in the image of God, as Brother Rob read to us this morning from Psalm 8. Man is the pinnacle of God's creation. Well, first of all, the evidence for human evolution is sparse. What you see on the screen are the bones of Lucy. And when the man found these bones, this is the most complete skeleton of any ape/man that we found. This is the most complete skeleton. Now, Lucy has come to be categorized as probably a chimpanzee. The one who discovered it, Robert Leakey, Donald Johanson rather, claimed that it was evidence of human evolution. All excited, he named it Lucy. He gave it a human name because when he came back to camp, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing on the radio. And so he named it Lucy. And anytime you can give these bones a human name, it makes them look more human, doesn't it? But as other scientists start looking, they say, you know what, it just doesn't have the characteristics of a human. Well, there's only about 6,000 fossils of humans that have been found. Now, there's a lot of fossils that are out there. Most of the fossils are of small, simple animals. The more complex the animals get, the fewer and fewer fossils you find. Now you think, well, 6,000 fossils, that's a lot of fossils. No, it's not either. Because most of those fossils are either teeth, or they're parts of bones, a lot of clavicles and shoulder blades, a lot of vertebrae in the back. Which means that if you got all of these fossils together and you put them in a box, you could fit all of these fossils in a box about that big. Now, scientists want to come along and say, well, that right there proves that humans evolved from apes or from an ape-like creature. There's not a lot of evidence, is it? It's just not a lot of evidence for us to believe that humans are not created in God's image. But you see, this theory of evolution and all these bones that we get together in this box, there are things about human beings that evolution simply cannot answer. Things that are unique, in fact, among human beings. Where did our consciousness come from? All of us are aware that we ourselves exist. And we can communicate with other people about our own existence. I've got a dog, but my dog doesn't communicate about his own existence. And in fact, I was just thinking yesterday, I was out mowing my yard, and this big riding tractor comes up to the kennel, and Dusty was in the kennel at the time, and I'm getting as close to the kennel as I can, so I don't have to run weed here. And so I'm getting as close to the kennel as I can, and Dusty runs around on the other side of the doghouse. Because he doesn't understand that, number one, that tractor can't get inside the kennel. And number two, I'm not going to run over him. You see, he's not aware of his own existence. But human beings are. Evolution can't explain that. Evolution cannot explain why a man would run into a burning building to risk his own life to save somebody else. Evolution can't explain that. Where did that desire, that ability to sacrifice your own life for the good of someone else, where did it come from? Evolution can't explain it. I've got a book written by an evolutionist, William Fix. William Fix is an evolutionist, a science writer. He's a writer, a journalist, but he writes about science matters. And back in the early 80s, and some of you older members may remember this, President Ronald Reagan commented publicly on the news that he believed that creation science ought to be taught in the public fashion right along with evolution. Well, that created a big stir, as you might expect, among science teachers, biology teachers, obviously evolutionists. And so William Fix, who was an evolutionist, said, well, I'm going to look at the evidence, all this hubbub. And I'm going to see what the evidence is. And when he came to the conclusion, after looking at all the evidence supposedly to prove that humans have evolved from some ape-like creature, he put it in this book and he entitled it The Bone Peddlers. Now, you know what a peddler is? Somebody who comes along and they've got their jacket full of watches, you know, or they've got the hats, you know, and they're trying to peddle and sell. And his presentation is that's what evolutionists are. They've got these bones here and they're trying to sell this theory of evolution. Now he ends up his book saying, I believe in evolution. He's not a creationist. He doesn't believe in the Bible. But he says that if one is separated from the discussion, as he was, if he's separated from the discussion and he looks at the evidence, he says he believes that you can see a thorough review of the known evidence shows that human evolution is still simply a theory. He looked at the evidence, wrote a book about 400 pages, and he said there's simply not any evidence there. The book was written in 1984. The evidence for human evolution is sparse. The second point I want to make, and that is that the evidence that is there is so tainted that you can't believe the people who are promoting it. And the history of the study of human evolution is filled with examples of this tainting the evidence. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that right now. Charles Darwin wrote his famous book, The Origin of Species, in 1859. In 1859, there were no human fossils. Now, The Origin of Species does not present his theory of human evolution. That book comes later. But he does suggest the idea in that book, and he says in the book that he believes fossils are going to be found to prove his point. In 1859, there was no evidence, physical evidence, for evolution of humans. Now, the first group of evidence that came along was Neanderthal man in Germany. Neanderthal man today, the consensus with the Neanderthal man is that he's basically a modern human. Looks a little bit different because his diet was different, but basically Neanderthal man is a human. One author says that if you gave him a shave and you put a shirt and tie on him, he'd walk down the streets of New York and nobody noticed any different. That might be saying something about New Yorkers, but his point is that he would look like everybody else. But in 1908 to 1912, there was a dig in Piltdown, England, on the land of a man by the name of Charles Dawson. So for 4 years they go out and they dig around and they come up with a couple of bones. And now they think they have the evidence. So this is what, about 50 years after Charles Darwin wrote his book. Now they've got some evidence that humans have evolved from ape-man in Piltdown, England. And so it came to be known as the Piltdown man. Piltdown man, the intermediate link, the missing link, the transitional species in ape-to-human evolution. They found a section of the skull, and they found a part of the jawbone with one of the canines had been worn down as if it had eaten like a human. And so it spread like wildfire across the world. Now, you and I are historically far removed from that, so we haven't ever heard about it. But if you were to ask your great-grandparents, they would have heard about it. The New York Times ran this big headline, "Darwin's theory is proven true." It makes its way into encyclopedias. If you read my article in the bulletin, Sir Arthur Keith wrote books or doctoral dissertations written on human evolution because Piltdown man proves that humans evolved from apes or ape-like creatures. For 40 years, a whole generation, young people are growing up in schools and being told, here is the evidence from Piltdown, England, that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. But the truth is, their only evidence was this small section of the jaw and that small section of the skull. So how did they get to this big image of a person who was a full human-looking being? From the jaw, part of the skull. And so the Reader's Digest in 1956 reprinted an article ran in Science Digest magazine pointing out that the Piltdown man was all a big hoax. Nobody knew who the guilty party was, but it was determined eventually that the jaw was actually the jaw of an orangutan, and it had been treated with chemicals to make it look old. And so all of these scientists and all of those people who wrote their doctoral dissertations had egg on their face. It was all a big hoax. This whole discussion about human evolution is filled with evidence of people perpetrating these frauds. Look at this list of people. All of these have been presented to the American public and the worldwide public as evidence that humans evolved from an ape-like creature, and every one of them have since been proven a fraud. You've heard of some of them, I'm sure. The search for the missing link. Where is the link between an ape and a human? That's the search. And the problem is, it has come up empty every time to this day. And in fact, just a couple of years ago, I bought this book, Shattering the Myth of Darwinism. And Richard Milton, who wrote this book, is also an evolutionist. He claims, I don't believe in the Bible, I don't believe in creation. He also is a science writer. But he comes to the discussion with enough honesty to say, I'm going to look at the evidence. And he says, here's what happens. Here's the pattern that these scientists follow. Number one, they find these bones in the dirt. And they examine these bones, and the first thing they say is, here is the missing link, and they give us some human-sounding name. But then those bones, or pictures of the bones, are distributed among